But welcome everybody. The last session, thanks for making it this long. And then, can anyone not see my screen right now? Okay, that's great. So thanks for coming. And today I'm going to talk about the link between transportation, land use, and community wealth building. And just a little bit of background. My career right now, I'm a graphic and ITF designer at Econ. I've been there for a few years. And then I'm also working to get a master's in planning right now at Temple. And I should graduate May of next year. You can have real graduation since then. But my reason for focusing on this, I did a paper and some research this semester for one of my classes about this topic. And it's a topic that I've thought a lot about recently. And what the kind of impetus behind it was that in my work as an engineer and then in planning school, it's a really interesting time because I feel like there's a huge dichotomy right now. So you have really interesting things happening because of urbanism. You have people coming back to cities. You have people liking dense blocks of development, and then you have really cool transportation technology such as Uber lifts, e-scooters, e-bikes, all the automated vehicles. So it's a really exciting time, but at the same time you have this, which everybody knows, you have huge concerns about displacement and gentrification. And so with this, the whole strategy was, with this, my research was trying to figure out what are things that cities, states, DOTs, MPOs could do to try to focus on building wealth. Focus on building wealth versus just focusing on economic development, or trying to actually help communities everywhere except just a few. So in this presentation, here we go. I'm going to talk about the difference between economic development and community wealth, the urgent need to build community wealth, and then some transportation and land use strategies to build wealth. And then I'll have some time for questions at the end. I'm pretty sure this goes till 3, I think. Yeah, so there'll be some time for questions. So here's the definition of community wealth from the Democracy Collaborative. So this is a systems-based approach to inclusive community-based economic development based on local and broad-based ownership. So why community wealth? And what's the difference? Well, economic development is really top-down. You have big governments trying to lure big corporations and trying to increase top-line indicators such as just overall number of jobs or GDP. For community wealth is bottom-up. You have people working together trying to create new solutions to increase make the economy better. And then economic development is about extracting wealth. So you have places like Walmart and Amazon, where they not only take tax incentives from governments, they also take wealth out of the community versus retaining wealth. Things like Main Street and small business, where you go to Joe's donut shop and then Joe goes buy something at your hardware store. So you keep the wealth within the community versus just sending it out to Wall Street or something like that. And right now, there's a huge need for local wealth because wages have stagnated for 8% of Americans. Inequality is the highest in decades. Entrepreneurship is the lowest in decades. And gentrification is displacing long-time residents. And this is not even taking into account all of the effects of COVID, which from all the indicators are in terms of effects on small business, restaurants, it could even hurt community wealth more. And so there are some links between transportation and economic development historically, but transportation investments have been diminishing returns. So when we keep funding just highway building and keep funding certain types of investments, we're not getting the same return as we did back in the 30s when we built more highways, or in the 50s when we built the interstate highway system. Building more interchanges is not going to increase economic development. And then you also have an unequal distribution of benefits and costs. So back to highways, you had people who, in the suburbs, you had a great benefit because access was increased and mobility was increased. But without the cost of what the people in urban areas had, where you had minority communities not only having a highway cut through their neighborhood, but you also had all the effects of pollution and all the other negative effects of highways. And DOTs and MPOs, Departments of Transportation, and municipal planning organizations like the BRPC, they mainly address economic development through things like grant programs, or some will take into account, in general terms, economic development in their transportation decisions. But there's not a real concerted effort to focus on building wealth of places that don't have wealth right now. So I'm going to go over just a couple strategies to build wealth, and I broke it up into two categories. So the first, wealth for people, which includes increasing access, prioritizing pedestrians, incrementally building trust, and incrementally building projects. And then the second category is wealth for cities, which includes investing in productive places. And I didn't come up with these myself. These are strategies I pulled, like trying to research and pull from other places. And I've been greatly influenced by people like Charles Marone at Strong Towns and some other related organizations that are trying to do a bottom-up wealth building and transportation decisions versus top-down. So I'm going to focus on the final three for this presentation because everyone here knows that if you're at a transportation camp, I assume that you're aware of increasing access helps connect people to jobs, which builds wealth. And then prioritizing pedestrians helps to create more vibrant places. And so more vibrant places with more small format stores creates more wealth than if you have a big box store on the edge of town with a Walmart in it. So, but I'm going to focus on the last three because I think these are ones that are not as common in the conversation right now in terms of transportation and land use in regards to economic development and building wealth. So first, I'll go over incrementally increasing trust and building trust. And right now, as we all know, there's a huge demand for walkable urban neighborhoods, but not much supply. And what this is leading to is certain growth in certain neighborhoods that haven't had a growth in decades, but this is leading to displacement. And so this leads to a lot of mistrust. And a really good example of this mistrust intersecting with infrastructure decisions and transportation is this community meeting that occurred at 52nd Street in West Philadelphia earlier this year. And so 52nd Street, for those who don't know, is a historically African-American commercial corridor that was really vibrant in the 50s. There was a huge jazz scene. There was a huge, a lot of positive economic growth. It was a great commercial corridor. It was the main street of West Philadelphia, especially for the African-American population. But in recent years, the past couple decades, because of redlining and because of the rebuilding of the Market Frankfurt line subway, it has fallen into decline. And so at this meeting, there was a proposal to do some very basic things, such as increasing sidewalk widths, adding more crosswalks, adding street trees, adding lights, just fixing very basic things, very basic transportation things that planners know would definitely help increase the economic development of the corridor and help build the wealth of the corridor. But there's a lot of mistrust there. And even something as basic as pedestrian improvements cause a lot of anger. And so here's a couple quotes. It just seems that when white people come back to a certain neighborhood, they want it a certain way. Or they salivate over our homes. They just want to use our property and they don't want to make the community better. And these residents at the meeting, they also expressed how they do want community, they do want development, they do want economic development, but they want it for everybody and not just a few, which many people during the session today have talked about. Like this is nothing new. It is a huge problem of trying to bring this economic development to everybody, and that's the importance of building wealth. But how do we bridge this trust gap? One way is through community engagement. And there's a really cool program by New York City DOT called the Street Ambassadors Program that works like this, where you go out to people and meet them where they are. You don't ask them to come down to City Hall. You don't ask them to get childcare to go to a community meeting at some place that it might take a half hour to get to. You go to where they are at community events, local business, things like that. Then you gather feedback. You go ask them what they think about a certain project, or even just more generally about a corridor. So, for example, for 52nd Street, just say, if you wanted to make improvements, you would go talk about not only pedestrian and bicycle improvements, but you just go talk about just things in the corridor that they don't like, that might be in the city's realm of possible effects. And then you actually go submit work orders. If you take what the community says and you do some quick hit things such as fixing potholes, replanting trees, just things that are cheap and easy, and then it helps you to build trust of the residents. And then you do regular things that planners do. You go do analysis, you create proposals and alternatives, and then you go back to the community. And this is a way for them to feel engaged in the process and to be engaged and to actually trust a DOT more than they would before, that they know that you're trying to help revitalize their community rather than just create a place to push them out. So related to building trust incrementally, is to build projects and development incrementally. And this is because cities are really complex, because we really don't know what will work, and too often there's top-down solutions with little feedback. And the solution for a solution is practical urbanism, and which is, I'm sure many of you know, it's temporary materials, cheap materials, with lots of community engagement, lots of feedback, and it's bottom-up, scalable, and small. And the idea is that instead of a DOT spending $5 million over 5 years to do one project that may or may not work, and then oftentimes feedback is not gained afterwards. It takes so long and it's so hard to build it, and you just go and do it, and then you don't look at it again. Meanwhile, you can do 5 projects over 5 weekends for $5,000, and you have a much more better idea of what actually improves the lives of residents and improves the wealth of the community. So maybe planting a street tree actually blocks people from going to a business, whereas you do a bump out and it helps create people linger in front of a business. So you have a better idea of what works and what doesn't, and it helps to build the wealth of the community and also continue to build their trust because they're engaged throughout, and that no one knows the community more than people who live in it. And so you actually have the best solution for that community. And as I mentioned, Charles Marone, he's a great leader in this, and his organization, Strong Counts, has done a lot of this, and I think he's a really good mindset about how to go about this and the shift that DOTs need to make in order, and our transportation industry in general needs to make in order to improve this. And here's a 4-step process. 1, to humbly observe where people in the neighborhood struggle about going about their daily routine. 2, identify the next smallest thing that can be done today to address that struggle. Do that thing, do it right away, and then repeat the process. And so this is so kind of opposite of what we do now. I think everything is about opposite. We, as planners and engineers, know exactly what's needed. We do the biggest thing, we do it 10 years later, and then we do it once, and then do another project 5 miles away. So it's a total different mindset, but it's a way to go small and then build up instead of the opposite. And then he also talks about, in terms of incrementally building development and projects, that thicken up neighborhoods. And he says, he talks about no neighborhood being exempt from change, but no neighborhood should experience radical change all at once. And what this means is that right now, as you know, transportation projects, zoning right now is really restrictive, and you have certain areas getting the fire hose of development where you can't develop anywhere else. A lot of times that's poor and minority communities that can't fight back. And so instead of just putting all the development in certain areas and letting no one else have any development, you do a little bit of development everywhere. And so you don't have big towers next to 1-story buildings. The idea is you have a 5-story tower next to a 4-story tower, next to a 3-story building, next to a 2-story row home, etc. So before you just have single-family homes, now you have accessory dwelling units and other types of very small incremental tendencies. But then, then you go from a 3-story building to maybe a small apartment building, and then just keep leveling up from there. And so in places like Philadelphia, where most of the city, I think I saw a statistic recently that was almost blew my mind. It's like 70% of the houses the buildings themselves are row homes, and that is it's one that is a pretty dense community, but you don't have any intensity, and all the development's concentrated in certain areas. So it's built up everywhere to alleviate the pressure in the areas where all the development is. And then moving on to building productive places. It's really important to build the wealth of cities, because as we know from COVID, if a city is poor, it can't handle certain things, such as responding to a crisis, or even just basic things like public transit, police, fire. If they aren't able to do those things, it affects the ones who don't have money the most. It affects those who don't have wealth, because they have nowhere else to go. And the way cities can build wealth is to invest in more dense, walkable places, because sprawl is unproductive for cities and bankrupt them. So in sprawl, you have spread out areas that have high infrastructure maintenance costs. A highway costs more than a 2-lane street. And then, so those cost a lot, but then the development, the Walmart is not productive enough to pay for all of that infrastructure. Even though, like, to say a DOT comes and builds that, a lot of times, maybe not a highway interchange, but other roads will be maintained by the city, but the development that was made cannot pay for it. And so I think a way for cities and states to try to have a better handle on this, to do a value per acre analysis. And it goes like this, where step 1, you calculate the property tax revenue per acre. And then step 2, you subtract that current budget revenue. Basically, your revenue minus your costs, basically like a business transaction. But then you calculate the unfunded maintenance cost, because a regular yearly budget doesn't account like all the things you have to pay for the future that most people don't consider. It's about almost actualizing the future costs you have to pay. So you calculate those unfunded maintenance costs, then you subtract those unfunded maintenance costs, and then you have a better idea of how your city stands. But let me provide an example. So there's a city right at the tippy bottom of Texas called Brownville, and has a population of 183,000 people. So a decent-sized city. It's right on the border of Mexico and Texas. And a firm called Virginity, which is a pioneering firm in this, they did a land value per acre analysis, and they calculated the city's unfunded street maintenance costs. And what this is just the street maintenance costs it's just the lifetime cost of maintaining a street. So repaving and then metal replacement. And they calculated this as $1.3 billion over the lifetime of all the streets in the city, taken together. And the cost per year, $65 million over 20 years, which is a lot of money. And it's obviously not what they would be paying in particular every year, but these costs will be paid eventually. And so this is the initial map they made. So this is just the revenue minus the budget. This is all the revenue the city gets from these parcels minus all the costs. And so it looks pretty good. Green is positive, and the higher the bars are even more positive. So nothing seems particularly negative. So the city's looking good. But then you take into account the maintenance costs, and everything looks a lot different. And what it shows is that sprawl is bankrupting the city. There's all these parcels that are a drain on the city's maintenance and infrastructure budget. And what's interesting is that this little green spot right here, that's the historic downtown. That's the dense walkable area that often has lots of small businesses and lots of community wealth. So you have dense, walkable, productive downtown with lots of community wealth versus, which I'm sure out here is strip malls and very wide roads and unsafe and not productive. So these are drain the budget. And just showing another example. This is Lafayette, Louisiana. This is done by Charles Marone and another firm called urbanism. And so they calculated that city a $60 million tax base and $32 billion infrastructure liabilities. And you can see here too that's interesting is that the affluent neighborhoods are being subsidized by the poor neighborhoods. So when you would drive through these areas, the poor neighborhoods you would think might be blighted. You think that these are areas that still have some hope, and these are areas that you think would be draining the affluent areas' budget, but it's the exact opposite, because these areas are dense, walkable, and they make better investments for cities. And so Brownville, they made a shift. They took development incentives from the edge to downtown, and this is in Texas, which is notorious for not having many planning rules or loving sprawl. And so what they cited was that it would grow the city's tax base, close the funding gap, and would build the local wealth of the community. And I think this example should be brought to everywhere in cities around the country, because this helps to have a better conversation about dense walkable development and bikeable development, things that a lot of people at Transportation Camp really think are great, and things that these planners and engineers know are safer and create better, more vibrant communities and build wealth, but too often are caught in, I think, a political fight. So instead, when you go to a community and you're like, oh, it's great to walk and bike, it makes you healthy, or it helps the environment, which are, I believe, are noble goals, but a lot of people don't. And so instead of just focusing on those arguments, you focus on the economic argument, because everybody understands money, and they understand that and they understand their taxes. So a lot of people, if you create a more dense, productive place and lower their tax rate, they will be about it. So I think money is a more universal language. As good or bad as that is, I think it's a way to have more inclusive communities at scale than we do have now in civics. Because right now, it seems many arguments are not working in terms of creating more dense, walkable, productive places that we want. And like new urbanist communities, these are not growing as much as we want. And so how do we take that next step? I think it's doing something like the land value predictor analysis at scale. But in conclusion, building wealth is greater than economic development. And to build wealth, cities should really focus on involving the community continuously and creating more productive places. So that's the presentation part. I think we still have about 20 minutes. If anybody has questions or would like to add anything to the discussion.
Hey, Andrew, can you hear me?
Oh, David, you talking?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, that was a really good presentation. My question to you was, have you seen any other cities that have taken similar initiatives to what Brownsville did?
Yeah, so there's so the one firm that did that analysis, they're called Unity. I can put it in the chat in a minute. But they do a lot of work like that. But they do it for the very small towns, and then another firm called Urban3 does it for bigger cities, and they do similar types of analysis. But I haven't seen Brownsville is a few I've seen where it seems like they've made a change to it, where they actually took that information and were like, okay, now we're going to decide to invest in denser places, more walkable places, rather than sprawling places, because it makes sense. Instead of being like, oh, the Walmart is going to bring economic development, and we'll do that instead. So I think it seems to get pretty recent trends, so I don't think there's any huge examples that I've seen. But I think they're starting to build some momentum, from what I understand.
Hey, Andrew. This is Ben. Great presentation. Yeah. Going back to, I guess, the example of 52nd Street, obviously, and the concerns with, obviously, citizen participation and engagement. I'm wondering if you've ever encountered a concept by Professor Scholar Shelley Arnstein and her ladder of citizen participation. There's obviously a huge spectrum of I guess of models where first, obviously, you have oppression and marginalization from the system, but then as you climb the ladder, you have sort of a more engaged and more focused, where the ideal in her mind would be obviously total citizen control of the planning process. I'm just wondering, do you think that there are avenues within technical urbanism or any of the DOT models where you see reflection of that ladder of participation in a sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and that's such a useful tool in thinking about citizen participation. They can really think about it in relation to each other. And I feel like technical urbanism is a really good way to kind of find that sweet spot, because obviously you don't want, people are busy. You don't want to ask them about every little thing, what they want, because people have lives. And so it's finding that sweet spot of you want their input, but you don't want to just do what a lot of DOTs do, just go, show up, tell them what to do, and what's happening. So I think it's a good way to engage the community. And same thing about going out to where they are. But that's such a challenge. Like community engagement seems like such a challenge because you like no matter what you do, you have a little bit of self-selection bias, no matter who you talk to, and like outgoing people are more likely to go to outgoing things where you're going to them, and you're never going to get 100% of the people. But yeah, I think I really like a tactile urbanism or meeting with people where they are. I mean, I know Ben, you've done a lot with that in terms of community engagement and working with people that fit square. Like, how have you guys? What successes have you seen, and what have you found has worked?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard where like a group like us. I think it's obviously the work professional. It's like also self-selection in that sense as well. I think I've looked to a bit of models where I've worked in Chinatown for a bit with PCDC there, and looking at how at least for a few sections of the community plan, they've been able to at least gain some level of engagement beyond, I guess, the usual survey or feedback, and I think at least like having the funding capacity to be able to like even say like, oh, here's like here's Vine Street Expressway, what do you want to be in the future, and how can we expand that like concept? Like I think there is a role in top down when it comes to funding, not necessarily obviously the organization, but the actual funding structure is like huge. The grant planning for any sort of one of these things so that planners could actually like function beyond their usual work office would be huge for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, the grant process is interesting because it doesn't because you go to where you get the funding rather than maybe a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Hey Ben, could you put the name of your organization in the chat?
Oh, I'm not officially affiliated with it, but I can link to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna link this by slides in here right now too.
Yeah.
So are there strategies that people have seen in other cities and towns, besides the one, including or besides the ones I talked about, that people have found to be pretty useful in doing things that related to building wealth, or more bottom-up approach to transportation decisions?
So one of the organizations that I was an intern with, we were trying to do a better job at reaching out towards our community. So this is in Charlotte. Worked with University City Partners. It's a nonprofit advocacy group for business improvement and transportation in the University City neighborhood in Charlotte. And one of our big tasks for the summer that I was there was creating an interactive map for residents of the area, so that way they could further understand what was happening. So me and a couple of other interns were responsible for getting each development into kind of like a story map and explaining the purpose of the development, how this is going to help people in the future. And that's one of the few places where I've seen kind of interactive solutions to help people understand like what's going on, because I feel like when you have residents and you have organizations, when you have city governments, there's always this disconnect. Nobody can ever kind of speak back and forth with each other. So this isn't exactly the most bottom-up approach, but I feel like it's something that'll help bridge the gap, having interactive solutions, so that way people like regular civilians can understand, what's going on in their neighborhoods, and that'll give them the opportunity to give feedback, so that way they can say, this is what I would rather see in my neighborhood. This is what's going to help me or help my children in the future. So just having interactive solutions, I think, would be a good start, or something that other cities should implement, other organizations.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So you said it was a storyboard type thing?
A story map.
Okay.
So there were multiple new, I guess, recreational facilities, government facilities like police department, fire department. They had new facilities in the neighborhood, and developers would come in and they would build like a hotel, or they would build like a new strip mall or apartment complex. So our responsibility was to speak with the developers of the new places, speak with the city government, and basically detail what was going to happen, so that way we communicate to people that are in the zip code, because there's a huge disconnect between the city government and developers and civilians. So that was our job, to kind of bridge that gap. I feel like it's important for other like nonprofit organizations, or just for city governments in general, to help bridge that gap with interactive maps or interactive like web pages and things like that. So that way people can understand, what's going on. And that's a civilian outlet to give feedback. And I feel like that's really important, civilian feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool, and it's really cool that they're trying to bridge that gap. I mean, there's such a big developer resident gap often, and and the government, like all three, are disconnected.
Especially when the developer isn't even local. Like the developer for most of the stuff that we were mapping out, they were from Texas, so nobody knew these guys. So we had to make sure that we understood what they were trying to do, and translate that into civilian language. Say, hey, developers coming in, they want to be able to help everybody out by building a apartment complex within a half mile of this transit station, so that way people that are moving in, and you can walk to the apartment complex, you can walk to the shops that surround and the restaurants that surround the apartment complex. So really important.
Yeah, that's really cool. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good example of like bridge that gap, I think. So any other examples? I think Daniel looks like he's putting in some comments. I think we have another 10 minutes. Yeah, that's right. So we have another 10 minutes. If anyone wants to chime in. So Daniel said that having land use regulations and transit done by different governments has some real downsides, definitely. And and then Ben saying that MPOs can really play a bigger role. And I do think with COVID right now, it seems like, and I've seen a couple articles on this, like the importance of a region versus a city or the different municipalities, because we are really siloed between the different ones. And like obviously, like it seems like the best way to plan a certain area is regionally, because you aren't, like, city of Philadelphia is closely connected to its surrounding suburbs, and so I do wonder like how MPOs like DVRPC can better coordinate, or just regions in general coordinate governments-wide, because a lot of municipalities do their own thing, especially in Pennsylvania, which I'm not sure some people who aren't from Pennsylvania don't know, is that like our counties don't have planning. They don't. Municipalities have like local rule in terms of like their zoning codes and their development, and like counties don't like preempt them over the regulations, and so it can be very like one municipality will do something versus another municipality, and they can conflict with each other. So it's hard to have overall strategic initiatives, especially for like smart growth or these kind of projects. So I do, if anyone wants to chime in about what are the way for us to do planning better regionally, or even just cooperation regionally, maybe they've seen done with themselves in their work. Yeah, I mean, it will be a challenge. What about just in terms of just effect on local business right now, in terms of what people are seeing with COVID, and like obviously no one's going to know the effects right now until for a while of the real long-lasting effects. But what are people seeing and hearing in their own communities about how COVID's going to affect small business and local.
Well, I was going to ask. So, like, I'm not sure how it works, I guess, in Pennsylvania, but do municipalities ever kind of collaborate on, I guess, their zoning code or some of their planning regulations, so that way they can avoid conflicts when it comes to, I guess, planning, I guess, close to their municipality borders? Or you just said that counties don't really do it, but do counties ever collaborate, or do they kind of leave that up to the state or each municipality?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. Like I know generally, but obviously I don't know.
I can say a little bit. So there's been very few examples of this in Pennsylvania, but like a few municipalities, like townships in suburban Pennsylvania, when it comes to issues, I guess when you have like really rural areas that don't have a lot of constituents that really speak about us a lot, sometimes they will take their own initiative to really regularize, I guess, the planning a little bit, so that like clients like big industries or like electric companies that have to like deal with like cross-border stuff, a lot of times will have that advantage. But really, when it comes down to the reason why the municipalities are there in the first place, right, it's because they were sort of like that back before the government really like settled land, back in the Western U.S. But here it's just like groups of communities that formed up spontaneously and have always held that intrinsic community themselves. So it is really hard, I guess, for planning to work cohesively in that context. Definitely, yeah.
Hi, David. I actually work for one of those suburban Philadelphia county planning commissions. I do want to say we do some things. We try. A lot of the time it is trying to facilitate between a regional idea and what our individual municipalities are allowed to do, because they are definitely allowed to do a lot of things without much input from others. And Ben kind of hits on it. It's, they were founded on the intention of, we are out here, we are able to set up our own little home rule area and do what we want. So it's a challenge. It's a lot of soft skill negotiation. It's a lot of attempting to steer in the right direction. I mean, we have a regional overall regional plan. We have a county comprehensive plan. We're able to at least let the discussions and directions hopefully go in the way that we'd like to. All that's, of course, available online. But at the end of the day, if a municipality wants to go a different way, we can tell them, I don't know if you should go that way, but they don't have to necessarily listen to us.
Thank you. That was a good answer.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's really insightful. So what are some of the ways that you do try to do that soft skill negotiation? Because which county do you work for?
I'm Montgomery County, the largest of the suburban Philadelphia counties. It really, a lot of what it comes down to is, what the County Planning Commission in Pennsylvania was established to do was review developments through the Act 247 land development review process. And we actually have a lot of our staff people go out to the municipal meetings. And that's really where the soft skills come in. It's the familiarity that we have with each of those individual municipalities. Our planners work on development reviews, work on trying to construct new zoning codes or land development subdivision ordinances and things like that. And just being there at those municipal meetings, getting the familiarity together and being the conduit of information both to and from, from the local level up to the region and to the county and back down. That's, I think, the most important part of it. It's about staying involved and staying active and keeping the lines of communication open.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's interesting. You have to really work on it's the relationship part of it. And I mean, it seems like from the plans I've seen, that Montgomery County seems to have a lot of great initiatives, and so it's like bringing it down to the local level. This is the art.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple more minutes left. Any other final thoughts? All right. Well, I'm thank you for coming to the presentation. Really appreciate it. If anyone's interested, I think I'm over the next couple months. I want to try to do a land value analysis for something around Philadelphia. So if anyone's interested, let me know. Hit me up on LinkedIn, Andrew Halt, or I'll put my email in the chat if you're interested. You can always email me. But yeah, thanks for coming to the presentation, and thanks for coming to Transportation Camp. I'm glad we've had you all here. Thanks for staying to the end. You guys have been great. And so we do have happy hour afterwards. If you're interested, go to the same table links. Just coordinate with people, jump to the table, continue the conversation if you want to. But if not, enjoy the weather for those in the Philly area. Nice out. And thanks so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.